Welcome to our Friday morning webinar on managing remote teams. My name is Lona Smart, and I will be facilitating this webinar for you today. Today, we're going to cover communication, trust, delegation, and accountability. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some conversations about motivation. However, these are topics that we talk about quite frequently here at Revela, but today we're going to have a little different spin because we know that so many of you are working remotely during these challenging times. There will also be a few times during our discussion today that I will give you a chance to jot down how this information applies specifically to you and your team. So you might want to grab something to write on. Please note, since this is a video recording, you will need to pause your video, complete the exercise, then restart it when you're finished, rather than me just pausing silently for a period of time. I'll allow you to pause, however, like whatever length of time that you specifically need, and then you just restart the video again when you are finished. So thank you for joining us. I hope you get a few tips or strategies out of this discussion today. So first thing, we're going to start off with an activity. I want you to take a minute and reflect on what you love about the work that you do. Think back to before all of the recent interruptions to our day-to-day lives. What were those things that got you up in the morning and kept you motivated through even the most challenging times in the past? Again, this would be a good place to pause while you work on jotting down your 3 things that you love about your work. When you're ready, rejoin the video. For each of us, our list will look a little different, and that's okay. It just means that we're all motivated by different things. As I think about what I love about the work that I do, that is truly the constant that still exists today. How I do that work has changed for sure, but why I do that work has not really changed. That purpose is part of what keeps me motivated to think outside the box and find ways to overcome barriers that we are all currently facing. As we move through our discussion today, I hope you find some insights that help you reconnect with your why and can help your team do the same. We want to help you find new ways of fulfilling that purpose that kept you motivated in the past. So let's start with communication. Old rules for our communication has completely changed. Communication is always a difficult thing to get right. And that was when we were likely working out of the same office space, or at least in the same general vicinity. We could walk over to someone's desks or their office, we could have weekly in-person meetings with our whole team. Now the only time you might bump into your coworkers or team members is on your computer. We're all trying to decide which way is the best way to communicate and stay in touch with our teams. It's going to probably take some trial and error to start with. You might be thinking that the best thing is to go straight to video conferences if your team is now working remotely. However, just like email, text messaging, face-to-face, all of those, video conferencing can be overdone too. So it's really about finding the best way to communicate and connect with your team. So I'm going to give you some things to consider and a few best practices as you're making decisions about what method or modes of communication you're going to use, the frequency of connecting, as well as just a couple of ways to help you establish new communication norms for your team. The first thing I want you to think about and consider is what type of team do you lead? We have a simple analogy here at Revela that helps you understand the different types of teams. Think about how much your team needs to collaborate and also how specialized each individual's work on your team is. So how much do they need to coordinate and collaborate versus how specialized the work that they do is. As an example, in our type 1 team, first team at the top there, swimmers on a swim team each have their specialty, but how their teammate swims doesn't directly impact their individual performance. They're all on a team still, but they're highly specialized individually, and they have low coordination. So high specialization, low coordination. Bowlers, on the other hand, work fairly independently, just like swimmers do, but each of them is essentially doing the same task, right? They all bowl. So their specialization is very low. They have low coordination and low specialization, still on a team though. A football team gives us a different perspective. It's high coordination, and high specialization. So players have different roles within the team, which become that player's specialty. Football players also have to coordinate intricate plays where each person has to do their part once the football is snapped to be successful. Therefore, high coordination, high specialization. The last team we're going to talk about is a volleyball team. Players are rotated through each position on the team, but they have to coordinate those plays and work together to be successful. So in this team, low specialization and high coordination. At this point, you might be asking yourself, why is this even relevant to how I communicate with my team? So as you're thinking about your team meetings, your individual one-on-ones, I think this is actually a really good point to take into consideration. How much does your team coordinate or have to collaborate, or how specialized they are? So this should influence the frequency and the content of your meetings. If they're highly specialized, then maybe more frequent one-on-ones make more sense. If they have to coordinate a lot to be able to be successful and get the work done, then we really need more team meetings so that we can find out where one person left off and the other person begins and how many updates they need to have. So here's some pre-work that we can do as we are planning for our meetings and the different communication sessions that we have. So obviously our goal here is to be more intentional with our communication. We want to make sure our communications count. Just simply communicating more isn't the answer. You may find that you're overwhelming your team with too many check-ins that are unproductive and end up just being time wasters. So here's some communication pre-work that will help raise the standard of communication on the team. Assess and evaluate how much your team really needs to collaborate. This is that collaboration, coordination, specialization thing that we were just talking about. If they rely on each other to get different aspects of their individual work complete, then they have high collaboration. More frequent team meetings done virtually are best. This may be weekly or daily, depending on how quickly things change. If team members are also very specialized, then make sure you establish set times for one-on-ones to discuss topics that are specific to that one individual. Don't meet just for the sake of meeting. Have a specific agenda or objective that you want to achieve with this meeting. Ask yourself the question, why are we meeting? And what do I want to get out of this meeting? If you can't answer that question, then your team will be wondering why they are meeting as well. Now, your purpose and objective during this time where we're all working remotely might be just to connect, which is fine. And actually, I really encourage that. But make sure that objective is clear and that purpose is clear to your team so they're not wondering why you're just getting around, getting together virtually just to chit chat. And have some fun things or fun questions that you can ask your team to make it more interactive and get them engaged. So then we also need to determine the frequency of meetings. Again, this depends on the level of coordination and how quickly things change. Some teams need to meet daily. We're doing that here at our organization because it just makes sense. We've got 5 or 6 people who are involved on any one project. So we need to be able to give each other frequent updates so we know where one person left off and another one starts. That may not make sense for your team. Maybe a weekly check-in, maybe every other week. Again, this depends on the level of coordination and how quickly things change for your team. Last, just because you have 6 people on your team doesn't mean that all 6 people need to be at every meeting. Only invite those that really need to be involved. Trust me, everyone will thank you. You can truly have subgroups that are meeting more frequently than the whole group. So then we think about all these different ways that we have to communicate, right? We've got email, video, phone, instant messaging, text messaging. Those are kind of similar. Whether you realize it or not, your team has previously established communication norms. So when you guys were working in the same office, there were norms around how you communicated. And you guys, they may have been unwritten norms, but there were still some norms there. Maybe your team used more email than face-to-face. Maybe your team has never used video conferencing before, and maybe they're already pros. Involve your team in a discussion to establish new team norms. Ask your team, get them involved on when and what to communicate. Ask your team what will work best for them. Is there a time of day that works better for them than another? I know we're all challenged with having to figure out this new norm of working with our kids, sitting right next to us or running through the house or pets barking, whatever that might be for you, whatever challenges you're experiencing. your team is experiencing some of those challenges too. So you might just have some open-ended, two-way discussions about what makes the most sense for your team, when is a good time to meet, what information do they want to cover in those meetings, etc. Try new ways of meeting to share information and connect. If all of the information you want to share is one directional, meaning you have updates to share with your team and there really isn't a need for discussion, then an email is probably the best way to share that information. Then people can access it when it's convenient for them. If you want to have a two-way discussion, then do your best to set up a video conference or a conference call at the very least. Again, that encourages more discussion. Quick bites of information are perfect for IM or text messaging, but if it's an in-depth conversation, let's get on the phone or let's do a video chat. I'm going to go back to some meeting tips. I think just good reminders for all of us. When you do have a video or conference call meeting, run your meetings effectively, right? Just as you would expect somebody to do if we're having a face-to-face meeting. I'm a firm believer in having an agenda for every meeting. Send the agenda out ahead of time. Ask people to add to it if they need to or would like to. If there are things that they need to prepare ahead of time, make sure it's clear. So you may want your team to read or review something before you discuss it in your meeting. That actually helps your meeting time be more productive. But again, make sure it's clear and you set that clear expectation that you do want them to read that information ahead of time. If you're using video, it can be awkward at times when you're unsure of when to jump in or if you should jump in at all. If you're hosting the meeting personally, call on specific individuals to share their insights rather than asking open-ended questions that you just throw out to the whole group. As an example, a lot of video chat meetings are like, how's everybody doing? No one knows if they should actually answer that question or not, or people start talking over each other, which makes it difficult to hear. Find ways to engage all of your meeting participants, giving each person a platform, a time to share their updates and or respond to questions. Again, that's easier if you actually call on specific people at specific times rather than just leaving it open-ended to everyone. Make sure you set a good example for start and stop time, just like you would in person. Be respectful of other people's times. Next, follow through on your plan. If you say once you decide how often and how frequent you need to have those meetings, make sure you hold them. Be consistent. People need us to be consistent right now. And so if you are going to meet weekly, then have that meeting, make it a priority. After your meeting is completed, recap any to-dos, follow-ups, and make sure you know who's following up on what. Before we move on, take a minute to pause the video and jot down one or two things that you can do to improve communication with your team and among your team members. When you're ready, rejoin the video. We're going to continue our conversation on communication, but we're going to switch gears a little bit, talk about it in a slightly different way. Instead of just talking about meetings and modes of communication, we're going to talk about communication and trust. Normally, when we are face-to-face with people, we have three things that we use to help us understand the meaning or intent behind someone's communication. Obviously, we have the words. They make up about 7% of how we understand someone's message. There's the verbal aspect, which includes their tone of voice, what words they emphasize, how quickly or slowly they're talking. That's the verbal aspect. It makes up 38%. You can see from this pie chart that 55% of how we interpret the meaning of someone's message is based on their nonverbals. So now we're in a situation where we are communicating primarily through phone, email, instant message, etc. And we miss out on all of those nonverbal cues that help us understand another person's intent. That leaves a lot of room for miscommunication, right? So what we're going to do, unfortunately, is jump to conclusions, make assumptions, and it can lead to a lot of resentment, frustration, and damaging of trust. Let me play out a scenario for you as an example. Here's what happens. Let's say, for example, I receive an email. That is my key moment. I make an assumption about what the person meant, right? I apply a meaning, make some assumptions about it. And in this example, let's say, for instance, I believe their intention was to be snippy and rude toward me. This causes me to be annoyed and frustrated, which leads me to fire back with an email, which is equally rude and snarky. Now, instead of making things better, I have made them 10 times worse. And it's completely possible that I misunderstood the meaning of their email in the first place. Maybe they didn't mean to be rude. Maybe it just came across that way. Maybe that's how I interpreted it because I was already frustrated, upset, or angry about something. So we add our own nonverbals to emails. We add our own tone of voice to the emails, even though all we have is the words in front of us. Research actually shows that we are much more likely to be rude to someone when we don't have to see them face to face. And if we don't manage this during this time of over-reliance on communicating with technology, we really have the potential to damage relationships. So what do we do to combat that? Now more than ever, I think we have to act and behave in a way that builds trust. When people are stressed out and experiencing a great deal of change, there's a tendency to jump to conclusions, make assumptions about what someone is or isn't doing, what they did or didn't mean. Maybe we're overthinking how someone is using their time and are they being as productive as we are? Are we working harder than they are? Or we do too much of reading between the lines in someone's email. We really need to focus on giving each other the benefit of the doubt and, as a leader, intentionally building trust on our team and with our team. So here's 3 things that you can do to intentionally build trust with your team. First, we need to demonstrate compassion. Then we need to be consistent. And finally, be a resource for our team. So our teams want us to be empathetic about their situation and their challenges that they are experiencing. They want us to know that we care about them as a person, not just about the work that they are or aren't doing. We need to be consistent. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And just as I mentioned when we were talking about the meetings, if you schedule a meeting with your team, don't reschedule it or cancel it. Make it a priority, because when you make it a priority, you're telling your team that they are a priority to you as well. And when your team members are struggling and need your help, chances are, as their leader, you're probably going to be the first person they call. So be supportive. Help them find the answers. Does not mean you have to have all the answers, but you can give them at least, point them in the right direction, help them problem solve. Right now, our teams need more support than ever. Another way that we can be a resource to our team is to help them cancel out some of the noise about what's going on in our world today. Giving people something specific to work on, helping them focus on their priorities, and then establishing key milestones along the way helps keep your team moving in the right direction. We've spent a lot of time today already talking about communication and trust, how to have better meetings, all of those things, right? But I know if you're managing a team, there's also some expectations that we still get work done, right? That we make some progress on our goals. And actually, if we can help our teams, get focused on goals, it can help them feel a little bit better about what's going on and help reduce some of that stress, to give them something to focus on besides some of the background noise going on in our world right now. Establishing key milestones is important as well, because if you think about a project, maybe as an example, that is going to take you 3-4 months to finish, that's the end goal. But we need to feel like we're making some progress along the way. So if we establish key milestones, that gets us some small wins, that helps create those small wins along the way, helps keep people motivated. So if we can come up with some of the milestones that we want to celebrate along the way, I think that will also help. Once we have established clear goals and helped our teams prioritize, your team may struggle with finding new ways to work at home, because our homes are full of distractions like small children, spouses, pets running around, all of those things. So encourage your team to block time to work on their highest priority tasks, right? So earlier we were just talking about helping them prioritize. Sometimes when we get stressed out and overwhelmed, we get focused in on those little things that don't really matter as much as the big things. So again, reminding our team what are those priorities. And if they can block out little bits of time where they can really focus, during those times we want them to reduce multitasking, things like turning off your instant messaging or your email notifications so you can just focus on the project. That is the priority right then and there. We also want each team member to create a system of how they're going to track things that they need to follow up on so they don't lose sight of those things, because all of the distractions, those are interruptions, causes us to, it pulls us away from what we were working on. We want to be able to easily pick back up where we left off. So let's find some ways to track those, like, okay, where was I? What was I working on? Where did I leave off? And get back on track as quickly and easily as possible. Last, just as a reminder, I want you to have a conversation with your team about working hours. When our home and our work lives are kind of mashed up and happening all in the same space, it becomes more difficult to shut work off. Give your team permission to turn off work when it's not during their established work hours. The work hours might be different for each person. That's okay. I think we can figure that out. But let's have some balance between, these are going to be my work hours, but when that's done, when those hours are over, I am going to focus on turning that off and just being present with my family or in my personal life. So having some conversations again about team norms, how they look different with our working hours, and how do we also be then respectful of each other's working hours and not interrupt each other when we're having that time with our families or just enjoying some personal time. Just because we can't visibly see our team the same way that we did in the past doesn't mean that the work isn't getting done. So I think this is just a reminder to not become a micromanager in response to working remotely. We might feel obligated to check in more frequently, and it might start to feel like a check up on your team where you're, from your perspective, maybe you're just checking in. Not everyone on your team will need the same level of support, and these levels of delegation actually remind us of that. So if you have a newer team member, they're at the lower levels of delegation, which just means they need more support, more training, more coaching. If you have a team member who's more seasoned, then your communication and check-ins can actually be less frequent. So we started off our conversation today talking about meetings and what's the frequency and consistency of those meetings. Your one-on-ones don't need to be the same for every single person. You might think now like, oh, I have to meet with every person every week. That may not be the case. Your newer person, you might actually need to check in with 3 times a week. Your person who's more seasoned and comfortable with their work, you might only need to check in with once every other week, right? So just knowing that, and thinking about evaluating where does your team fall along these different levels of delegation. Can they just go about their work and report out to you routinely of what they're working on? Or is it someone newer who needs more training, coaching, and direction? To prevent being frustrated when something's not done how you want or when you need it done by, we encourage people to kind of go back to the basics of delegating. So it's these four things, setting some boundaries around these 4 things: clear expectations, non-negotiables, time, and authority. It's important to review these things up front rather than waiting until something goes wrong. And again, that leads to frustration on everyone's part. So first, set clear expectations of what you want completed and discuss any non-negotiables. So these would be anything that you are not flexible with, right? Your non-negotiables are, these are things that we have to have in order to make this work. So as an example, if you need a document typed in Times New Roman font, then be specific. Tell them this information up front. I know it's kind of a silly example. Most things we do aren't that specific, but when you're delegating a task, before you delegate it, take the time to think about what those non-negotiables are and make sure that you've communicated those up front rather than after the fact. You don't want somebody to bring back work to you and you have to redo it or ask them to redo it because you weren't clear about your expectations or you didn't identify all of the non-negotiables. Agree on a time frame or a deadline that the project will be due. Some managers really struggle with this because they want to give their team members the ability to decide, how to use their time and how to prioritize things. However, I think that really opens things up for, misunderstandings, frustration when things don't happen when you think they're going to happen. So if you agree on a time frame or deadline with the person you're delegating to, this gives you a chance to check in with them as you're getting close to the due date to see how things are going. It allows you to be supportive, right? It gives you also something to hold them accountable to if that deadline isn't met. But if you didn't agree on the deadline up front, it's hard to say, well, you were supposed to have it done by now, when you didn't actually clearly articulate that up front. Last, we want to give the person the authority they need to complete the task. This is where we empower them to own the work and to take responsibility for it. So we've discussed the challenges of communication today, which directly impacts our ability to effectively delegate. I recommend following these steps whenever you delegate, but it's even more critical when we are delegating to a remote team to really go back to kind of some of these basics. Now let's put it all together. Think about a task that you need to delegate, or if you don't have one coming up in the near future, think about something that you delegated not too long ago. In your notes, I want you to walk through these following steps. Again, you might want to just pause the video temporarily so you can walk through these on your own, and then restart your video when you're ready. Choose a task to delegate. Who are you going to delegate it to? What would be the deadline that you need it done by? What are the benefits of delegating this task? So going back to the why is it important? Discuss what they already know and what training or resources would be needed. And then also establishing some method or frequency of following up. So are you going to check in if the project is going to take 4 weeks to complete, you're going to check in 2 weeks and see how things are going. And if you can agree upon those things ahead of time, I think it, again, reduces frustration along the way. So take a minute, work through those, and restart the video when you're ready. The last thing we're going to cover today is motivation. I started our session today asking you what you loved about your job and to think about those things. This is your why. So this is also what motivates you. Each of us is motivated by something slightly different. Regardless of what motivates each person on your team, there are 3 things that we can do as a leader to continue to kind of build that, why are we here? What's our purpose? Keeping people engaged and motivated. There are 3 things that every individual needs, and that is to feel valued, to feel competent, and to feel accepted. I'm going to go through each one of these separately and dive into them a little bit deeper, because I think it is some of the most important things that we can do as a leader to create that motivating environment. So the first one here, again, is to help our team feel important and to feel valued. They need to understand our team members need to understand how their job and their work ties into the mission or purpose of the organization, helping our teams focus on why they are important to the team and the functioning of the company. Simon Sinek, a well-known author, speaker, he says it best when he says, start with the why. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why is it important? So in your meetings, right, whether they're virtually or over the phone, reminding our team through our communication why we need to keep moving forward. Our teams need a little extra inspiration right now, and that needs to come from the leader. It needs to start with the leader. Our team also our team members are probably feeling a little overwhelmed, right? Wondering if they're going to get through, stressed out about what's going on, trying to figure out this working from home thing. Help your team build more confidence that they will get through these challenging times. Each team member has strengths and abilities, and so we're allowing them opportunities to use those strengths. It may be different than what they did before, right? And maybe you're asking them to do something different, and as you are thinking about who to assign what task to, tapping into their strengths. Maybe even doing a strengths inventory with your team, asking them what they believe their strengths are and how they could best use those strengths in these times. Again, you don't have to necessarily have all the answers, but having some discussions about this with your team will be really helpful. When we feel our best when we get to use our strengths. So if we can tap into that, I think that's the best case scenario. Also, looking back into history, chances are your team has experienced challenges in the past that they've had to overcome, that they've had to rise up to to meet the challenge. Sharing those examples, reminding your team of those times and how your team has potentially rallied to make it through in the past. We can build on those past successes and help our teams feel more successful. It is not our job to fix everything for our team members, but we can always be a good listener. We can listen with empathy to what our team is struggling with. And it may be something that's completely out of your control, which is really hard as a manager to just sit there and listen and not have all the answers. Be vulnerable, explain that you don't have the answers, but you are here for them and will support them in any way that you can, even if it's just to listen. Chances are your team, you're also asking them to step up right now. So make sure you acknowledge the extra effort that your team is requiring, or that you are requiring from your team. Find ways to show appreciation. I saw on social media the other day a lady that I was connected to, her leader had sent her a care package at her home to let her know that she was being thought of and the work that she was doing was appreciated. So we need to make sure that we are finding ways to appreciate our team. And even if you feel like you do that already, and that you're pretty good at that, I would even challenge you to try to step it up a little bit more. I think our teams need that right now. Finally, I'll just recap with a few last thoughts, just as reminders. Ensure your team feels valued, appreciated, and competent as a leader, doing things to help them feel that way. Another gentle reminder as a leader, don't forget to take care of yourself. It's hard to bring out the best in your team if you're not really feeling your best. Give your team some grace, and at the same time, give yourself some grace. We have many resources available on our website. We also post daily reminders on our social media, so connect with us on any of these platforms for nudges that help turn best ideas into action and then into results. Again, I'll leave you with a quote from Simon Sinek. The goal is not to be perfect by the end. The goal is to get better. So find ways that you can get a little bit better at leading your team through these challenging times. Thank you for joining us today.